I sent my daughter $2,000 every week so she could live well, 38 missed calls when I invited her for Christmas. I only needed to hear her voice to understand that my own flesh and blood had turned me into a stranger. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 68 years old and live in a small apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. From my window, I can see the bustle of Lincoln Avenue, where people rush to their jobs, their appointments, their full lives. I stay here, between these four walls that smell of lavender and loneliness, waiting for a call that never comes. My routine is always the same. I get up at 7 in the morning, brew coffee in the Italian stovetop espresso maker my late husband, George, gave me 30 years ago, and sit in front of the phone. I wait. I always wait. The hours pass slow as molasses, marked only by the tick-tock of the wall clock I inherited from my mother and the distant sounds of the neighbors preparing to face another day. Up until 3 months ago, my day started differently. I would wake up with a smile because I knew I had a purpose: to take care of my daughter, Jenna, and my granddaughter, Chloe. Every Tuesday, religiously, I went to the corner bank, that Wells Fargo where the teller already knows me by heart, and wired $2,000 to my daughter's account. $2,000 that represented almost all of my widow's pension, plus the savings George had left after a lifetime of working as a union electrician. "Mrs. Hayes," Linda, the teller, would say, "are you sure you want to send so much money again?" And I, with my chest puffed out with pride, would reply, "It's for my family, dear. So my granddaughter has everything she needs." Jenna always had a reason. "Mom, the washing machine died and we need a new one. Mom, Chloe needs private English tutoring. It's so expensive, but it's her future. Mom, we have to fix the car. We can't get to work without it." Every request came with that sweet voice that reminded me of the little girl who once ran through my kitchen, stealing pieces of chocolate chip cookie dough while I was baking. But there was something in her words that no longer sounded the same, a coldness that had settled in over the years, like those leaks that start small and end up corroding the entire structure of the house. Her "I love you, Mom" sounded automatic, mechanical, as if she were saying them while thinking about something else. My apartment had become my refuge and my prison at the same time. Every corner held memories of when we were a real family. On the living room shelf, between my Jodi Picoult novels and the grease-stained cookbooks, I have a framed picture of Jenna on her graduation day. She was wearing that navy blue dress we chose together at Macy's, and her smile was so genuine it seemed to light up the whole photograph. Next to her, George was embracing her with that paternal pride that makes fathers stand 2 inches taller. I was on the other side, my hair freshly styled at Brenda's salon and my eyes shining with happiness. At what point did that young woman full of dreams turn into someone who saw me only as an ATM with a pulse? The answer came on a Tuesday in November. Gray like all Chicago Tuesdays in November. I had been preparing pot roast, Jenna's favorite dish since she was little, thinking that perhaps I could convince her to come for lunch with me that weekend. I hadn't seen her in 3 weeks, and the last time she came she barely stayed 20 minutes. She sat on the edge of the sofa as if she were in a hurry to escape, constantly checking her cell phone while I was telling her about my physical therapy exercises for my hip. I dialed her number with those arthritic fingers that no longer obeyed as before. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "What is it now, Mom?" Her voice was a sigh of exasperation, as if my call were an annoying interruption to her important day. "Hello, honey," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "How are you? How's Chloe?" "Fine, everything's fine. What do you need?" That question cut through me like a knife. What did I need? I needed to hear that she loved me. I needed her to ask me how I was, if I was sleeping well, if my medication was agreeing with me. I needed her to invite me over for coffee, to ask for my advice about something, anything that would make me feel like I was still her mother and not just a source of funding. "Christmas is coming up," I said with a trembling voice. "I thought that maybe you could come for Christmas Eve dinner. I've been practicing that honey glazed ham recipe that your father liked so much, and—" "Mom?" she interrupted me with that tone she used when Chloe misbehaved. We've talked about this. We have our plans. Brad has family too, you know? Not everything revolves around you. Brad, her husband, the man who had won my daughter over with promises of a better life, of intelligent investments in the stock market, and future plans that sounded so sophisticated that I couldn't understand them. He worked in something related to crypto and Bitcoin, or at least that's what he said. Always dressed in expensive suits and talking about multi-million-dollar deals that were about to take off. It would only be dinner, honey. We could... Please, Mom, stop freaking out. Her voice rose, taking on that hardness that chilled my blood. Don't you understand that we're not children anymore? We're living our lives. You already lived yours. Why can't you get that? I was speechless, literally without words. The phone weighed on my ear as if it were made of lead. The pot roast was still simmering in the kitchen, filling the apartment with that aroma of savory meat and potatoes that had always meant home, family, love. But now it only smelled of uselessness. I just wanted to spend some time with you all, I murmured. I miss Chloe. I miss seeing you. I miss when we were what, Mom? When I didn't have my own life, when I depended on you for everything. That's over. Brad is right. You have to learn to live your life without worrying about ours. The click of the phone hanging up echoed in my ears like a slamming door. I stayed there with the receiver in my hand, looking at the wall where the framed print of the nativity scene hung, which my mother had given me when I got married. Family is everything, she had told me that day. Guard it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. How do you protect a treasure that no longer wants to be protected? How do you love someone who considers that love a burden? That night, as I stirred the pot roast that no one was going to eat, I realized that I had been sending money every week for 5 years and had received exactly 2 visits that lasted more than an hour. 2 visits in 5 years. And on both occasions, the conversation had revolved around some urgent economic necessity that required my immediate help. The apartment felt smaller that night, as if the walls were closing in on me. In the silence, I could hear Mrs. Klein next door watching television, the muffled sound of laughter from some entertainment program. Normal life, normal people, normal families who ate dinner together and told each other how their day had gone. I opened the drawer where I kept the bank statements. Sheet after sheet, transfer after transfer. $2,000 every Tuesday for 5 years. I had sent over $500,000. Money I could have used to travel, to fix the leak in the bathroom, to buy new clothes, to live with dignity instead of surviving on the bare minimum. But it wasn't the money that hurt me. It was the love account that had gone into the red. What I didn't know was that this phone conversation would only be the beginning of my descent into hell. The next day, I decided to try again. Maybe Jenna had a bad day at work. Maybe Brad had pressured her. Maybe she just needed time to reflect on what she had said. I dialed her number at 10 in the morning, when I knew Chloe would already be at school and she would have a moment of peace. The phone rang and rang until it went to voicemail. Hello, you've called Jenna. Leave your message and I'll call you back when I can. Hello, honey, I said when I heard the beep. It's Mom. I just wanted to apologize if I bothered you yesterday. It wasn't my intention to pressure you. Call me when you have a moment, okay? I love you. I waited all morning. Nothing. In the afternoon, I called again. This time the phone rang barely twice before going to voicemail. She had deliberately rejected it. The message I left this time was shorter, more desperate. Jenna, please call me. I just want to talk to you. The third day I tried calling at different times. Early in the morning, voicemail. At lunchtime, voicemail. At night, voicemail. It was as if she had disappeared from the planet, taking my granddaughter and any trace of the family I thought we had with her. I decided to try a different tactic. I sent her a WhatsApp message, with those trembling hands that no longer handled the cell phone Jenna had given me last year well. Only for emergencies, she had said then, as if talking to her were a luxury I had to ration. My sweetie, I've been thinking about what we talked about. You're right, maybe I was too pushy. I just miss my granddaughter. Could you send me a picture of her? It's been weeks since I've known how she is. The message was marked as delivered, then as read. But no reply ever came. The days turned into a sickening obsession. I counted the missed calls as if they were beads on a digital rosary. 1, 2, 3, 10, 15, 20. Every unanswered call was a small death, another confirmation that I had become a bother in my own daughter's life. Linda at the bank started to notice my state when I went to make the usual weekly transfer. My hands trembled more than usual when signing the receipt, and I must have looked like I was at a funeral because she asked me if I was all right. Just a little tired, that's all. I lied, forcing a smile that must have looked more like a grimace of pain. Is your daughter still with those prosperous businesses? Linda asked as she processed the transfer. $2,000 a week? She must be making very good investments. Investments. The word resonated strangely. I had never thought of the money transfers as investments, but as acts of maternal love. But investment implies a return, doesn't it? And I had been investing for 5 years, without receiving anything but indifference in return. Yes, I replied automatically. She's doing very well. But as I walked back home along Michigan Avenue, dodging tourists and office workers who seemed to have important destinations, I realized that I had no idea what my daughter really worked on. I only knew that Brad talked a lot about numbers and computers, about financial markets and golden opportunities that were always about to take off. He had mentioned something about mining Bitcoin from home, about creating a family wealth that would secure the future for everyone, including me. When this takes off, Eleanor, Brad had told me the last time I saw them, you're going to be very proud that you invested in us from the beginning. Your money is going to multiply tenfold. But where were those profits? Why did they still need my $2,000 a week if the businesses were doing so well? Why did Jenna never talk to me about Brad's successes, only about the new needs that arose every week? On the 20th day without news from her, I decided to do something I never thought I would. Go to their house unannounced. They lived in Winnetka, Illinois, in a high-end development of luxury townhomes that cost more money than I had seen in my entire life. I took the L train to the transfer station, and then a bus that took forever to arrive at its destination, winding through streets where the cars were worth more than my entire apartment. The house was exactly as I remembered it. Perfectly maintained lawn, brick facade, 2-car garage, a house that screamed financial success, prosperity, the life Brad had promised to give my daughter, a life that I was unknowingly financing. I rang the doorbell with my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird. I heard footsteps approaching, the sound of locks being turned. The door opened slightly and Jenna's face appeared, but not with the surprise I expected, but with something much worse. Pure annoyance. What are you doing here, Mom? No hello. No, what a surprise. Not a hug, or at least a smile. Just that question loaded with irritation, as if my presence at her doorstep were a territorial violation. I wanted to see you, I said, feeling how my voice sounded small and pathetic. You haven't answered my calls, and I told you I had my own plans for the holidays. Why can't you respect that? Behind her, I could hear the television on, sounds of a children's program suggesting Chloe was home. My granddaughter was there, less than 15 feet from me, and I couldn't see her. Is Chloe there? I asked, trying to peek over Jenna's shoulder. I just want to say hi. It's been so long since... She's doing homework, she cut me off dryly. She can't be bothered. Bothered. As if the visit from her grandmother were a bother to an 8-year-old girl who used to run to hug me every time she saw me. Jenna, please. Just 5 minutes. You don't even have to invite me in. I just want to see her. Know that she's okay. My daughter sighed with that exasperation she reserved for the most irritating situations in her life. For a moment I thought she would give in. That maternal instinct, or at least human decency, would make her reconsider. But instead, she took a step back and began to close the door. Mom, you have to get over it. We're not kids anymore. We don't need you worrying about us all the time. It's smothering. Smothering? The word came out as a choked cry. Is sending you money every week smothering? Is worrying about you smothering? It's not the money, Mom. It's everything else. The constant need for attention, to be part of our lives, I am your mother, I exploded, surprising myself with the force of my voice. I'm not asking for attention. I'm asking for love. I'm asking for a place in my granddaughter's life. I'm asking to be treated like family, not like a bothering stranger. Jenna looked at me with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. For one terrible second, I didn't recognize the girl I had raised, the teenager I had supported through her identity crises, the young woman who had cried in my arms when her first boyfriend left her for someone else. "Brad is right," she finally said. "You're pathetic, Mom. Just plain pathetic." And she closed the door. I stayed there, on the front step of the house that my dollars had helped pay for, looking at the varnished wood that separated me from my family. Through the living room windows, I could see the lights of the Christmas tree they had set up, golden ornaments shining with the warmth of a home that no longer included me. I walked to the bus stop as if I were in a trance. The trip back to Chicago was a blur of unshed tears and thoughts that spun like leaves in a whirlpool. When had I become someone who was pathetic? When had maternal love transformed into an unbearable burden for my own daughter? That night, in the solitude of my apartment, I counted the missed calls one more time. 38. 38 attempts to contact my daughter in 21 days. 38 little pleas for love that had fallen into the digital void of her indifference. The phone rang near midnight, startling me from a doze full of nightmares where my granddaughter didn't remember my name. For a moment of irrational hope, I thought it might be Jenna, calling to apologize, to explain that she had a bad day, that she hadn't meant those terrible things. But it was a number I didn't recognize. "Eleanor Hayes?" A masculine voice I didn't recognize asked. "Yes, this is me. Who is speaking?" "I'm Detective Miller, from the Chicago Police Department, CPD. I'm calling in reference to your son-in-law, Brad Thompson. We need to speak with you about some bank transfers." The world stopped. The words police and bank transfers echoed in my head like funeral bells. And suddenly, all the money I had been sending for 5 years took on a completely different meaning. "Police?" My voice came out as a broken whisper. "I don't understand. What happened to Brad?" "Mrs. Hayes, I can't give you details over the phone, but we need you to come to the precinct tomorrow. We are investigating an online scam network, and your name appears in several bank records as a potential victim." Victim. The word fell on me like a bucket of ice water. For 5 years I had believed that I was helping my family, investing in their future, making sure Chloe had everything she needed. And now a police officer was telling me I was a victim. Victim of what? I asked, although deep down I was already beginning to understand the terrible reality. "Of fraud, ma'am. Your son-in-law has been using the money you were sending to feed an illegal online gambling network. There are no investments, no prosperous businesses. It was all a lie." The phone slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a dry thud. I stayed there, in the middle of my living room, looking at the walls that suddenly seemed to be closing in on me. Every dollar I had sent, every sacrifice I had made, every meal I had skipped so I could send more money, it had all been to feed the vices of a man who didn't even consider me family. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. The detective was still on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Hayes, are you there?" Yes, I'm here. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, CPD's Lincoln Park Precinct. Ask for me, Detective Miller, and bring all the bank statements you have of the transfers." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea that went cold as I reviewed all the bank papers over and over again. Transfer after transfer, each with a date, an amount, a reason that now sounded ridiculous in the light of the truth. To fix the car, for Chloe's school tuition, to invest in crypto, to buy stocks in the market, for an emergency fund. All lies. All elaborate excuses to keep bleeding my savings while Brad compulsively gambled on illegal platforms. At 10 sharp, I was at the precinct, carrying a plastic bag full of bank documents that represented the evidence of my own stupidity. Detective Miller turned out to be an older man, about 50, with gray hair at his temples, and an expression that mixed professionalism with genuine compassion. "Please have a seat," he said, pointing to a chair across from his desk. "I know this must be very difficult for you. How much money?" I asked directly, without preamble. "How much money have I lost?" The detective consulted a folder full of papers. "According to our calculations, in the last 5 years, You have transferred $520,000 to Brad Thompson's account. Money he used to gamble in illegal online casinos, mainly high-stakes poker and sports betting. $520,000. Over $500,000. All the wealth George had worked 30 years to accumulate, plus my widow's pension, plus the small savings I had been putting together for decades, all evaporated in the fantasies of grandeur of a gambler. And my daughter? I asked in a voice that was barely audible. Did Jenna know anything? The detective looked at me with an expression that mixed sorrow and discomfort. Mrs. Hayes, your daughter is being cited as an accomplice. The transfers went into their joint account, and there is evidence that she knew the real destination of the money. WhatsApp messages between her and her husband coordinating the excuses they would give you to ask for more money. The world collapsed around me. Not only had I been defrauded by Brad, but betrayed by my own daughter. Jenna had been an active part of the deception. She had invented stories about emergencies and needs, while she knew perfectly well that my money was evaporating at virtual poker tables. Messages? I whispered. The detective showed me printed copies of WhatsApp conversations that the police had recovered from Brad's phone. I read in horror how my daughter and her husband planned each request for money. Tell your mother we need it for the car insurance. I lost $3,000 last night in a bad streak. I already asked her for money last week. She's going to get suspicious. Invent something about Chloe's school. Mothers always fall for that. Perfect. I'll tell her it's for English tutoring. Every message was a stab wound. Every conversation I read showed me how my daughter had turned my maternal love into a tool for manipulation. They talked about me as if I were an idiot, someone who could be abused indefinitely because I was too foolish or too desperate to maintain family contact. How much have they lost in total? I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Brad Thompson owes approximately $800,000 to various illegal betting platforms. Your money, plus fraudulent bank loans, plus scams against other relatives and acquaintances. It's a considerable operation. $800,000. My head couldn't process those figures. It was enough money to buy several apartments, to travel the world, to live comfortably for years. And it had all been lost to the addiction of a man who had manipulated my daughter to turn me into his personal source of funding. What's going to happen now? I asked. Brad is already in custody. Jenna is cooperating with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The house in Winnetka is going to be seized to pay part of the debts. And as for you, I'm afraid it is highly unlikely that you will recover your money. I left the precinct as if I were walking at the bottom of the sea. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The sounds arrived muffled. Reality had become gelatinous and unreal. On the subway ride home, I sat between workers and students who had normal problems, normal lives, normal families who hadn't betrayed them to the point of absolute ruin. For the next few days, Chicago continued its usual rhythm while my world disintegrated completely. News of the case appeared in the local papers. Scam network broken up that affected dozens of Illinois families. Gambler defrauds mother-in-law of $500,000 through elaborate deception. My personal tragedy had become a human interest story that people would read with their morning coffee before completely forgetting about it. The phone rang one afternoon while I was trying to eat soup that tasted like cardboard. It was Jenna. For the first time in weeks, she was calling me. I answered with trembling hands, not knowing what to expect. Mom. Her voice sounded different, smaller, stripped of that arrogance that had characterized our last conversations. What do you want? I asked, surprising myself with the coldness of my tone. I need to explain. I need you to understand that I didn't want this to happen. You didn't want to? The laugh that escaped me was bitter as gall. I have copies of your messages with Brad here, Jenna. Tell your mother that. Invent something about the school. Mothers always fall for that. Are those the words of someone who didn't want this to happen? The silence on the other end of the phone was so long that I thought she had hung up. At first, it was just to get by, she finally murmured. Brad promised me he would give it all back, that they were temporary investments. When I realized he had a gambling problem, it was already too late. I was afraid to tell you. I was afraid to lose you. Lose me? My voice rose. You were afraid of losing me while you were robbing me? While you were inventing fake emergencies? While you were telling me I was pathetic when I came to see you? The thing with the house, that was horrible, Mom. I was desperate. I knew everything was going to be found out and you decided to humiliate me one last time before the charade ended. No, it wasn't that. I love you, Mom. I've always loved you. But I was trapped in a situation that had spiraled out of control. The words I love you sounded hollow, empty, like fake coins that tinkle differently when they fall to the floor. Where is Chloe? I asked. With Brad's parents, in Atlanta. Until all this is resolved. I want to see her. Mom, now is not the time. Everything is very unsettled. She is confused. She doesn't understand why her father isn't home. I want to see my granddaughter, I yelled, surprised by the strength that still remained in my voice. She is the only thing I have left of this family of liars. The silence returned between us, heavy with years of deception, of misunderstood love, of trust destroyed without possibility of repair. I'll call you in a few days, she finally said. When everything is calmer. She hung up before I could reply. I was left with the phone in my hand, looking at the screen that showed call ended, as if those two words perfectly summarized what had happened to my family. Call ended. Relationship ended. Life ended. That night, while ambulance sirens sounded in the distance and Chicago continued its nightlife oblivious to my personal drama, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I was not going to wait for any more calls from Jenna. I was not going to beg for crumbs of affection anymore. I was not going to be a victim once again of empty promises and emotional manipulations. It was time for Eleanor Hayes to learn to live for herself, even if that meant starting over at 68, without family, without money, but paradoxically, for the first time in decades, without lies. The following days passed in a strange fog of self-imposed silence. I disconnected the landline and put my cell phone on silent mode. For the first time in 5 years, my mornings did not begin with the anxiety of waiting for calls that never came or transfers I had to make. It was a different silence than the one I had experienced during the weeks of Jenna's rejection. This was a chosen silence, controlled, my own. I sat in front of the bedroom mirror, the same one where I had combed my hair every morning for 40 years, and I didn't recognize the woman who looked back at me. My hair was messy, my skin grayish like someone who has spent too many sleepless nights, and in my eyes there was something that took me a moment to identify: absolute emptiness. Not sadness, not pain, not anger, just a void so deep that it seemed to have absorbed all the life from my face. Linda from the bank knocked on the door 2 days later. I had seen her from the window climbing the stairs with that maternal concern that people develop who have worked their whole lives dealing with customers who, without realizing it, become part of their daily lives. "Mrs. Hayes, you didn't come in on Tuesday to make your transfer," she said when I opened the door. "We were wondering at the bank if you were all right." I looked at her for a long moment, registering the irony that a bank employee showed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own family. "There will be no more transfers, Linda," I told her with a calmness that surprised me. "It's over." Her face showed confusion, then comprehension, then something akin to compassion. She was an intelligent woman who had spent decades seeing the money patterns of her customers and had probably sensed that something was not right with my weekly transfers for some time. Can I do anything for you?" she asked me. "Yes," I replied after thinking for a moment. "Help me close all the accounts I share with my daughter, and open a new one where only I have access." That same day, with Linda as a silent witness to my financial emancipation, I closed all the banking ties that connected me to Jenna. There was very little money left, barely $3,000 from a pension I had been stretching for months to cover the transfers. But it was mine. For the first time in 5 years, every dollar in my account belonged exclusively to me. For the next few weeks, Chicago continued its winter routine while I learned to inhabit my own silence. I went for walks in Lincoln Park when the timid January sun managed to break through the clouds, and I sat on benches where other people my age fed pigeons or read newspapers. I started observing those older women who seemed so serene, so complete in their solitude, and I wondered if any of them had been through the same thing as me. One afternoon, while drinking coffee at a bar on Clark Street, I overheard two women at the next table talking about their adult children. One of them said, "My son calls me every Sunday without fail, but sometimes I feel like it's more out of obligation than desire. Like he has an alarm on his phone reminding him, 'Call Mom.'" The other woman nodded knowingly. I chose to withdraw before we got to that point. I told my children that I no longer expected weekly calls, that when they wanted to talk to me, they knew where to find me. At first, they felt liberated, but then they started calling more, because it was no longer an obligation. Her words stuck into me like pins. Had I turned my maternal love into an obligation so heavy that Jenna had to resort to theft to free herself from it? Had my need to feel needed created the perfect ground for me to be manipulated? That night, I took out all the family photos I had scattered around the apartment. Photos of Jenna as a baby, Jenna as a child, Jenna as a teenager, Jenna on her wedding day. Photos of Chloe from newborn up to the last one I had managed to see on social media, before Jenna restricted all access. I spread them out on the dining room table as if they were tarot cards that could reveal where everything had started to go wrong. In the oldest photos, Jenna looked at me with genuine love. In the most recent ones, her smile looked forced. Her eyes avoided the camera. Her body posture suggested a hurry to finish the family moment. There were signs that I had chosen not to see, clues that my insistence on maintaining closeness had started to suffocate instead of nurture. The phone rang near midnight. It was a number I didn't recognize, but after so many days of silence, curiosity outweighed caution. "Grandma Eleanor?" The voice was small, childish, loaded with a sadness that cut through my chest like a knife. "Chloe?" I whispered, barely able to believe my granddaughter was on the other end of the line. "Yes, it's me. I'm at Daddy's parents' house in Atlanta. I found your number on Mommy's old cell phone. Honey, how are you? Are you okay?" The question stumbled in my throat. "Grandma, is it true that Daddy stole your money?" The question took my breath away. How to explain to an 8-year-old girl the complexity of what had happened? How to protect her innocence without lying to her? "Daddy did some bad things with the money, yes," I finally said. "But that's not your fault, or Mommy's or mine. Sometimes adults make very big mistakes. The grandparents here say that you are mean, that you always controlled Mommy with money. But I remember when you came over and taught me to make meatballs, and you told me stories about when Mommy was little. You didn't seem mean." Her words broke my heart and mended it at the same time. In the midst of all the devastation, there was one little person who remembered the good times, who had perceived the genuine love beneath all the manipulation that had surrounded our family relationship. "I'm not mean, honey," I told her with a trembling voice. "But I'm not perfect either. Sometimes, when we love someone a lot, we make mistakes in the way we show it. Can I come see you sometime? I miss your meatballs. And I want you to teach me more things about when Mommy was little." "I would love to see you, Chloe. But things are complicated right now. Mommy and I have to fix some adult problems first." "Are you going to fix the problems? Are you going to forgive Mommy?" The question hung in the air long after we hung up. Was I going to forgive Jenna? Could I? Should I? During the following nights, Chloe's voice accompanied me in my insomnias. She had called me Grandma, not with the formality that had characterized our last encounters, but with the affectionate naturalness of before. In her, there was no trace of the poison that the adults had injected into our relationship. To Chloe, I was still the grandma who made meatballs and told stories. A week later, Jenna showed up at my door unannounced. She looked terrible, haggard, with deep circles under her eyes, dressed in clothes she seemed to have been wearing for days. Behind her, almost hidden, was Chloe. "Mom," Jenna said in a hoarse voice, "can we come in? I need to talk to you." I looked at both of them from my doorstep, my daughter, who had robbed me of $500,000 and had tried to turn me into a stranger, my granddaughter, who was still innocent in the middle of the disaster created by the adults. "Chloe can come in," I finally said. "You can stay on the landing." Jenna paled, but didn't protest. Chloe ran into my arms with that childish spontaneity that I had missed so much. She clung to me as if I were a life raft, and I hugged her, feeling how something in my chest, something that had been frozen for months, began to slowly thaw. "Will you teach me to make meatballs?" she whispered in my ear. "Of course, honey," I replied, looking over her head at Jenna, who was waiting in the hallway with the patience of someone who knew she had lost the right to demand anything. While Chloe stirred the bechamel in the kitchen, concentrating on not splashing, I realized that I had a decision to make. I could continue to be a victim of what they had done to me, or I could choose what to rescue from the rubble of my family. I could forgive without forgetting, love without being naive, include without allowing myself to be used. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely lost. I had a granddaughter who needed me in ways that had nothing to do with money, and I had a daughter who, perhaps, with time and the right conditions, could learn to value what really mattered. But I was no longer going to be the same Eleanor who gave away love expecting to buy it. If we were going to rebuild something, it would be from scratch, with new rules, with clear boundaries, and with the certainty that my value as a person did not depend on how useful I was to others. It was a small beginning, but it was mine. The weeks that followed were a delicate experiment in the art of rebuilding a relationship from completely new foundations. Jenna came to pick up Chloe every Sunday, always punctual, always with that mixture of gratitude and humiliation in her eyes that constantly reminded me of the abyss that had opened between us. We exchanged the minimal courtesies necessary. "How are you?" "Fine, thank you." But the deep conversations were suspended in an emotional territory that neither of us knew how to navigate yet. Chloe, oblivious to the adult complexities, had turned Sundays into her favorite day. She arrived with a backpack full of homework that we did together at the kitchen table, while I prepared some traditional dish that I taught her step by step. She had an insatiable curiosity about the stories of when her mother was little, and I discovered that telling those memories helped me remember the Jenna I had raised, before the money and Brad's problems contaminated our relationship. "Did Mommy get into mischief when she was little too?" Chloe asked me one afternoon while we were peeling potatoes to make a Spanish frittata. "Lots," I said, smiling at the memory. "Once she ran away from school because she wanted to come home to watch a movie that was on TV that afternoon. She showed up at the door with her backpack and told me, 'Mom, I didn't learn anything important today, but they're showing The Lion King on TV.'" Chloe laughed with that clear, bell-like laughter of children who haven't yet learned to contain their joy. "And what did you do?" "Well, I sat down with her to watch the movie, and afterwards, I explained to her that skipping school wasn't right, but that sometimes mothers also needed an afternoon of movies with their daughters." In telling that story, I realized that I had forgotten that version of myself, the mother who was capable of being flexible, of prioritizing moments of connection over rigid rules. When had I started turning my love into something so desperate and suffocating? During one of those Sunday afternoons, while Chloe was drawing in the living room, Jenna stayed in the kitchen with me instead of waiting for her in the car, as she usually did. "Mom," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "I want you to know that I'm going to therapy." I looked at her without answering immediately, weighing her words. "Psychological or financial therapy?" I asked with a directness that surprised me. "Both," she replied, and for the first time in months I detected something genuine in her voice. "I'm in a program for family members of gamblers, and I'm also working with a therapist to understand how I came to justify what I did to you." "And what have you discovered?" Jenna sat across from me at the table where we had shared thousands of meals when she was a child, teenager, young adult. The same table where I had signed all those bank receipts that represented my financial ruin. That I turned your generosity into a trap for both of us. That instead of admitting that Brad had a problem and that I didn't know how to handle it, I preferred to perpetuate a lie that hurt you and destroyed me. Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she had practiced them in front of the mirror or with her therapist. But behind the rehearsal, there was something more, something that sounded like real understanding. "And now what?" I asked her. "Do you expect me to say that all is forgiven and we go back to how we were before?" "No," she replied quickly. "Before was wrong, Mom. I depended on you in ways that weren't healthy, and you gave in ways that weren't healthy either. If we're going to fix this, it has to be different." The word fix hung between us. Was it possible to fix a relationship that had been founded on such toxic patterns? Or would we have to build something completely new? "What do you propose?" I asked her. "That we start from scratch. That I prove for as long as it takes that I can be a daughter who respects you without needing your money. And that you see if you can forgive me someday. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Over the following months, we developed a strange but functional routine. Jenna had gotten a job as a sales clerk at a clothing store in the Westfield Mall, a job that paid much less than she was used to, but gave her the economic independence she had never had. She lived in a small rented apartment in Cicero, Illinois, had sold her car and used public transportation, and had learned to budget and live within her real means. Every Sunday, when she came to pick up Chloe, she would show me her accounts. At first, I thought it was a childish display, a way of proving that she had learned her lesson. But then I understood that it was something deeper. It was her way of being accountable to me, of proving that there were no longer any financial secrets between us. I saved $120 this month, she told me one Sunday in March, showing me a notebook where she wrote down every expense. It's not much, but it's mine. I don't owe it to anyone. It doesn't come from deceiving anyone. I looked at her there, with her hands stained with dye because she had started coloring her own hair to save money, dressed in clothes she had clearly bought on sale, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw my daughter working to achieve things instead of simply asking for them. Brad had been released from jail with a restraining order and the prohibition to approach Jenna and Chloe. He had started a rehabilitation program for gamblers, but Jenna had been clear. She didn't want to know anything about him until he proved for years, not months, that his recovery was real. For the first time since they had met, my daughter was making decisions without consulting a man who manipulated her. "Do you miss him?" I asked her one afternoon while we watched Chloe play in Lincoln Park. "I miss the feeling of being accompanied," she replied honestly. "But I don't miss living in constant fear that he would discover his lies, or having to invent excuses to ask you for money, or feeling like I didn't have control over my own life." During those months, I was changing too. I had started doing things I hadn't done in decades. I signed up for aqua aerobics classes at the municipal gym, where I met Martha, a 73-year-old woman who had raised 4 children alone and had that quiet wisdom of someone who has survived many storms. "Do you know the difference between helping and rescuing?" Martha asked me one afternoon while we were drinking coffee after class. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Helping is doing something for someone that they can't do for themselves. Rescuing is doing something for someone that they should do for themselves. You have spent years rescuing your daughter from the consequences of her decisions. Now you are helping her learn to live with those consequences." Her words stayed with me for days. I realized that my relationship with Jenna had improved precisely because I had stopped rescuing her. By forcing her to face her reality without my dollars as a cushion, I had forced her to develop internal resources she didn't know she had. I also started using my time in ways that surprised me. I resumed reading, something I had abandoned during the obsessive years of worrying about my family. I became a member of the Lincoln Park Library and discovered new authors, stories that transported me far from my own problems. I started cooking for myself with the same care I had put for years into cooking for others, experimenting with recipes I found online. One Sunday in April, while Chloe was helping prepare taco casserole in my kitchen, Jenna said something I didn't expect. "Mom, I want to pay you back the money." I looked at her in surprise. "Jenna, you know that's impossible." "It's over $500,000. Not all at once," she said, stirring the sauce with the concentration of someone who was learning to cook for the first time. "But something every month, even if it's $50, $100. I know I can never pay you back everything, but I want to try. Not because you have to forgive me if I do it, but because it's the right thing to do. And what if you can't do it? What if life gets complicated and you can't keep paying? Then it will be my problem, not yours. No more excuses, no more fake emergencies. If I can't pay you, I'll tell you the truth, period." That night, after they left, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about the journey we had taken. It wasn't the reconciliation I had imagined in my fantasies during the months of abandonment. It wasn't the perfect family from the movies where everyone hugs and cries and promises to love each other forever. It was something more real, more fragile, more honest. It was a relationship built on the basis of actions, not words. A relationship where love had to be demonstrated day by day, not taken for granted. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Summer arrived in Chicago with that suffocating intensity that turns the city into an oven. But for the first time in years, I had plans that didn't revolve around waiting for phone calls or worrying about bank transfers. Martha had convinced me to sign up for a trip organized by the Lincoln Park Senior Center, a week in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, at a modest but clean hotel where we could sunbathe, walk on the beach, and meet new people. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Martha had asked me one afternoon as we changed after aqua aerobics. The question left me thoughtful for days. I couldn't remember doing anything solely for my own enjoyment in decades. Every decision, every expense, every plan had been filtered by the question, is this okay if I have to send money to Jenna? Even my small pleasures, a coffee on a patio, a new book, a magazine, were accompanied by guilt for spending money that should be reserved for my family. When I told Jenna about the trip, I expected resistance, questions about the cost, perhaps some comment about whether it was prudent to spend money on frivolous things at my age. But her reaction surprised me. That sounds perfect, Mom. You deserve a real vacation. You think so? I asked, still struggling with the feeling that doing something for myself was a betrayal of my family responsibilities. I think you've spent 50 years taking care of everyone but yourself. It's about time you changed that. The day we left for Myrtle Beach, I felt like a teenager skipping class. On the bus, surrounded by other women and men my age who chatted animatedly about their grandchildren, their aches and pains, and their plans for the next few days, I realized that I had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a group where I wasn't the one who pays the bills or the one who solves problems. I was simply Eleanor, a 68-year-old woman going on vacation like any normal person. The first night at the hotel, dining on a terrace overlooking the sea while a gentle breeze relieved the heat of the day, Martha made an observation that stuck with me. You look different when you're not in Chicago. Like you're more, more present. Present. In Chicago, you always have that expression of waiting for something. A call, bad news, an emergency. Here, you are just here. She was right. For years I had lived in a constant state of alert, always preparing for Jenna's next crisis, the next request for money, the next emotional disappointment. I had forgotten what it felt like to be in one moment without anticipating the next problem. During that week, I learned things about myself that had been buried under decades of worrying about others. I discovered that I liked getting up early to walk on the beach before the tourists arrived, when the sea was calm and the sand was cool under my feet. I realized that I had a knack for making friends, something I had forgotten during the years of social isolation I had lived while obsessing over my family's problems. I met Susan, a widow from Atlanta who had raised 3 children alone after her husband Mark died in a work accident. Unlike me, she had set clear boundaries with her children from the start. When Mark died, she told me one afternoon while we were drinking sangria at a beach bar, my kids were 18, 20, and 23. I knew that if I didn't force them to be independent immediately, they would turn into eternal children who would always need Mom to solve their problems. And did it work? At first they hated me, she laughed, especially the youngest, who was the most spoiled. But now I have 3 children who wake up every morning knowing they are capable of solving their own problems. And when they call me, it's because they want to talk to me, not because they need something from me. Her words resonated with me all week. I had raised Jenna believing that love was shown by solving problems, but maybe true love was shown by teaching her to solve them alone. When I returned to Chicago, tanned and more relaxed than I had felt in years, I found a surprise waiting for me. Jenna had been looking after my plants during my absence, and she had left a note on the kitchen table next to an envelope. Mom, I hope you enjoyed your vacation. Here is the first payment of what I owe you. It's not much, but it's the beginning. I love you. Jenna. Inside the envelope was $150 and a receipt showing she had canceled her Netflix and Spotify subscriptions to save money. They were small gestures, but symbolically enormous. For the first time, my daughter was giving up things to pay money back instead of asking for more. That same week, I made a decision I had been putting off for months. I had been thinking about moving to a smaller apartment, something more manageable and economical that would allow me to live comfortably on my pension without having to worry about excessive expenses. But I had always made excuses. What if Jenna needed me? What if Chloe wanted to come for a sleepover and I didn't have enough space? But after a week of living in a hotel room and discovering that I didn't miss all the objects that filled my current apartment, I understood that I was clinging to a space too large for my current life out of fear of change, not out of real necessity. I found a perfect apartment in Wicker Park, in a renovated building with an elevator and lots of natural light. It was half the size of my current apartment, but it had a small balcony overlooking the pedestrian street full of coffee shops and independent bookstores. It was the kind of neighborhood where I could walk everywhere, where there was life at all hours, where I wouldn't feel isolated. When I told Jenna about it, her reaction confirmed that I was making the right decision. "That sounds great, Mom. You're going to love that neighborhood. There are lots of activities, a lot of interesting people, and it's much better connected than Lincoln Park. Does it bother you that I'm selling the apartment where you grew up? Would it bother you if I sold my house to move into something that made me happier?" Her question made me reflect. Of course, it wouldn't bother me. I would want her to live where she was happiest, not where she kept memories that perhaps no longer served her. The moving process was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. Every object I decided to donate or throw away was a weight off my shoulders. I kept the essentials: the books I really wanted to reread, the clothes I really liked, the kitchen utensils I actually used. Everything else, furniture I had bought decades ago, decorations that no longer reflected my current tastes, appliances I used once a year, found new homes or was donated to charities. Chloe helped me pack the books, classifying them by theme with the seriousness of someone carrying out an important mission. "Grandma, why do you have so many cookbooks if you already know how to cook?" "Because there are always new things to learn," I explained. "And because reading about food makes me happy, even if I don't cook all the recipes. Can I also have books that make me happy even if I don't use them for anything practical?" "Of course. The best books are the ones we read because we like them, not because we have to." Over the following weeks, as I turned the new apartment into my home, I realized that I was creating a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been or who others expected me to be. I chose colors I liked instead of the ones that looked good. I bought a small round table for 2 people instead of the large dining set where I had tried to gather a family that rarely came. I installed a comfortable armchair by the window where I could read in good natural light. The first Sunday that Chloe came to the new apartment, she was fascinated by the balcony. "It's like a dollhouse for grown-ups," she declared. "Everything is just the right size." And she was right. For the first time in decades, I was living in a space that was just the right size for my real life, not for the life I had imagined I should have. One night in September, while having dinner in my new kitchen with a perfect view of the street where people walked after work, I received a message from Jenna. "Mom, I've been thinking about writing you a letter with everything I've never told you. Is that okay? Not so you'll forgive me immediately, but so you can truly understand how we got here." I replied yes, that I was ready to listen to anything she had to say. But as I wrote the response, I realized something important. I was no longer desperate for explanations or apologies. My well-being no longer depended on what Jenna did or didn't do. I had found a way to be happy that didn't require the approval or constant presence of my family. And paradoxically, that emotional independence had made our relationship more genuine, not less. It was a lesson that had taken 68 years to learn, but it was worth every moment of pain it had cost. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my door as if Jenna had wanted to leave it without risking an immediate conversation. It was a thick envelope, on good paper, with my name written in the careful calligraphy I remembered from her school years. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat in my new armchair by the balcony where the October light streamed in soft and golden, and opened the letter that I knew could forever change the way I understood our relationship. "Mom," it began, "I don't know if this letter will make me a better person or simply confirm how selfish I've been, but I need to write it because for the first time in my adult life, I am learning to be honest." The first pages told things I already knew: how she had met Brad, how he had started betting small amounts that he won in online poker, how those initial victories had convinced him that he had a foolproof system for easy money. But then came the revelations that churned my stomach. The first time I asked you for money to fix the car was perfectly fine. Brad had lost $3,000 in one night, and we needed to pay some loan sharks who had started calling with threats. I knew it was a lie. I knew I was using your love for me to get money out of you, but I told myself it was temporary. Just this one time, I thought. We'll pay it back in a month when Brad gets lucky again. But of course, there was never any luck. Only increasingly greater losses that required increasingly elaborate lies. Jenna described with chilling detail how they had perfected the art of manipulating me, how Brad studied my emotional patterns, when I was most likely to say yes, what kind of emergencies caused me the most anxiety, how to use Chloe as an emotional leverage without it seeming like direct blackmail. We started calling you the Family Federal Reserve, she wrote, as if you were a bank that would always have funds available for our crises. Brad told me that all successful families worked that way, that successful parents helped their children build wealth, that when he started winning seriously, we would turn you into a millionaire. And I wanted to believe it, Mom. I wanted to believe that I wasn't stealing from you, but that I was giving you the opportunity to invest in our future. The most painful part came when she described the conversations they had after each successful transfer. We laughed, Mom. We laughed at how easy it had been to convince you one more time. Brad would imitate your voice, worrying about whether we had enough money for groceries, and I would imitate your sigh when he explained why we needed help again. We turned your love into a private joke between us. And the worst thing is that I didn't feel guilty. I felt smart, as if I had discovered a trick that other children didn't know. I had to put the letter down for several minutes to process what I was reading. It wasn't just that they had stolen money from me. It was that they had turned my maternal pain into entertainment. They had taken my sleepless nights worrying about their well-being and transformed them into funny anecdotes to tell while they spent my savings on online gambling. When I resumed reading, Jenna described the moment when everything began to change for her. It was when Chloe turned 8 and you couldn't come to her party because you had the flu. She spent the whole day asking about you, saying the party wasn't the same without Grandma Eleanor. And I realized that my daughter loved you more genuinely than I had loved you in years. She didn't see you as a source of expensive gifts or easy money. She saw you as a person who loved her unconditionally. And I was ashamed, Mom. For the first time in 5 years, I was ashamed of what I was doing to you. But the shame hadn't been enough to stop them. They continued to ask for money. They continued to invent crises. They continued to feed Brad's addiction with my hard-earned dollars. Until the police investigation exposed them and their whole house of cards collapsed. When the detective showed me the total amount we had stolen from you, I couldn't believe it. $520,000. It was more money than I had seen together in my whole life. And suddenly I understood why you lived with such austerity, why you never bought new clothes, why you refused invitations to eat out. It wasn't because you were cheap. It was because you were giving us your entire life, dollar by dollar. The letter continued with something I didn't expect, a brutal dissection of our relationship from her adult perspective. But I also have to tell you something harder, Mom. You taught me that love could be bought. Not intentionally, not consciously, but you taught me. Every time I had a problem and you showed up with money to fix it, every time you made me feel that your value as a mother depended on how useful you were to me, every time you turned your anxiety about being a good mother into my emotional responsibility, you were teaching me that relationships worked with transactions, not with mutual respect. Those words hit me like a slap, because there was truth in them, a truth that I had been avoiding for months. I had contributed to creating the toxic dynamic that had destroyed us. My desperate need to feel needed had created the perfect ground for me to be manipulated. I'm not writing this to justify what I did, the letter continued. I'm writing this because if we're going to build something new, it has to be based on the complete truth, not just the part that makes me look bad and you look good. We both participated in this, Mom. You out of fear of abandonment. Me out of the comfort of never having to grow up. The last pages described the process she had gone through in therapy, learning to separate love from money, help from dependence, filial responsibility from emotional blackmail. My therapist asked me what kind of relationship I wanted to have with you in the future. And I realized that I had never asked myself that question. I had always assumed that our relationship was what it was, without questioning it or trying to improve it. Now I want a relationship where we respect each other as independent adults, where I can ask you for advice without feeling that I owe you something in return, where you can be proud of me for who I am, not for what I do for you. The letter ended with a specific proposal. I want us to spend an entire day together doing something we have never done. Not cooking for Chloe, not talking about family problems, not reviewing accounts or discussing the past. Just two adult women getting to know each other as people, not as mother and daughter with all the baggage that entails. If after that day you decide that you don't want to continue our relationship, I will understand. But if you decide that it's worth trying, we will start from there, from who we are now, not from who we were. I folded the letter carefully and left it on the table. Outside, the life of Wicker Park continued its normal rhythm. Students walking toward the university, young mothers pushing strollers, retirees drinking coffee on the patios. Normal people living normal lives, without family dramas that kept them awake at night. Over the next few hours, I reread the letter 3 times. Each reading revealed something new, a truth I had preferred to ignore, a responsibility I had avoided assuming, an opportunity I hadn't known existed. That night I called Martha and read her the most important paragraphs of the letter. "What do you think?" I asked when I finished. "I think your daughter has grown more in these last few months than in the previous 5 years," she replied without hesitation. "And I think you have the opportunity to have the relationship you always wanted, but never knew how to build. What if it's another manipulation? What if this is just another way to soften me up to get something? What could she get now? You no longer have money to steal. You no longer depend on her emotionally. You have already shown that you can be happy without her. If she wants to build a relationship with you now, it can only be because she truly desires it." She was right. For the first time in our mother-daughter relationship, we were in positions of equality. Neither had something the other desperately needed. If we were going to rebuild our relationship, it would be because both of us freely chose it, not out of obligation or manipulation. The next day, I sent Jenna a message. "I accept your proposal. Organize the day whenever you want, but with one condition, that it be something neither of us has ever done before. I want to discover who you are when you are not being my daughter, and I want you to discover who I am when I am not being your mother." Her response arrived 2 hours later. "Perfect. You're going to love what I've come up with." And for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited to spend time with my daughter. Not out of obligation or nostalgia, but out of pure curiosity to meet the woman she had become when no one was watching. The day Jenna had organized for us turned out to be a surprise I never would have imagined. She picked me up early on a Saturday in November when Chicago was cool but sunny, and took me on the L train to a part of the city I didn't know, the Pilsen neighborhood. During the ride, we didn't talk about family matters. Instead, she told me about the ceramics class she had signed up for to manage the stress of her new life. "Ceramics?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "You never mentioned that you were interested in art." "I didn't know I was interested either," she admitted. "But it turns out that when you can't solve everything with money, you discover that you need other outlets for anxiety. And getting your hands in clay is strangely relaxing." We headed to a pottery studio run by a couple of Latino artists who had converted a small space into a room full of light, shelves loaded with pieces in different stages of completion, and the earthy aroma of fresh clay. Jenna had reserved a private class for 2. We were going to learn to make bowls from scratch. "I chose this because it's something neither of us has ever done," she explained as they tied work aprons on us. "And because it requires total concentration. You can't be thinking about other things when you have your hands on the wheel." She was right. The first 30 minutes were a revelation of how incompetent I could be at something completely new. My hands, accustomed to precise household tasks, didn't know how to press the clay without completely deforming it. My first attempt at a bowl looked more like a crashed flying saucer. Jenna wasn't doing much better, but she laughed at her mistakes with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. "This is so much harder than it looks," I said, as my second attempt collapsed into a formless pile of mud. "Like most things that are worthwhile," Jenna replied, focused on centering her piece on the wheel. During those 3 hours, I discovered facets of my daughter that were completely unknown to me. She was patient with long processes, had a good eye for proportions, and possessed a practical creativity she had never had a chance to develop. When I finally managed to make a small but functional bowl, I felt ridiculously proud, as if I had conquered Mount Everest. "Do you know what I like most about this?" Jenna asked me while we waited for our pieces to dry enough to decorate them. "That there's no way to cheat. You either learn the technique or it doesn't turn out well. You can't buy the result you want. You can't manipulate anyone into doing it for you. It's honestly yours, or it's nothing." Her words resonated in the studio like a declaration of principles. We were learning more than ceramics. We were learning new ways of relating that didn't depend on inherited family roles or power dynamics established decades ago. As we decorated our bowls with colored glazes that we wouldn't know how they would look until after the final firing, we started talking about things we had never discussed. Jenna told me about her plans to study for an associate's degree in business and finance, something she had wanted to do for years, but had never considered possible while depending on quick fixes for economic problems. "I want to really understand how money works," she told me. "Not to get rich quickly, but so I don't panic every time an unexpected expense comes up." I told her about my aqua aerobics classes, about the reading group I had found at the Wicker Park Library, about the strange but liberating feeling of making plans without consulting anyone else. "Do you feel lonely?" she asked me. "Sometimes," I answered honestly. "But it's different from how I felt when I was surrounded by people who didn't really value me. This loneliness feels chosen, as if it were a space I am creating to discover who I am when I am not taking care of others." While the Latino artists put our pieces into the kiln for the first firing, Jenna and I walked through Pilsen without a specific destination. The neighborhood had a cosmopolitan energy that I found stimulating. Taco joints next to traditional Irish pubs, vintage clothing stores next to art galleries. It was like walking through a Chicago I didn't know, multicultural and vibrant, full of possibilities I had never explored. "Do you know what surprises me most about you now?" Jenna asked me while we drank coffee on a patio surrounded by conversations in languages I didn't recognize. "That you seem younger, not physically, but more curious, more open to new things. It's because I'm no longer constantly afraid," I explained. "For years I lived in terror that you would abandon me, that you would stop needing me. Now that the worst thing I could imagine has happened and I've survived, I no longer have anything to desperately protect. And don't you miss me? Don't you miss how we were before?" The question made me reflect. Did I miss our previous relationship? Did I miss feeling indispensable, even if it was in manipulative ways? "I miss the illusion that we were a close family," I finally said. "But I don't miss the constant anxiety, the feeling of walking in an emotional minefield, the way I turned my love into a business transaction." We returned to the studio at the end of the day to pick up our bowls. The firing had transformed the damp pieces into real ceramics, and the glazes had acquired tones that neither of us had anticipated. My bowl had come out in a deep blue with golden streaks that appeared when the light hit it a certain way. Jenna's was jade green with coppery spots that looked like autumn leaves. "They are perfect precisely because they are not what we expected," the Latino ceramist said as she wrapped our pieces in bubble wrap. "The fire always adds its own surprise to the process." Back in Wicker Park, as Jenna walked me to my door, carrying my new bowl as if it were a treasure, I realized that we had spent an entire day together without a single argument, without resentment, without references to the traumatic past. We had simply been two women learning something new, laughing at our mistakes, discovering unknown facets of ourselves. "Shall we do this again in a month?" Jenna asked before saying goodbye. "We can find another activity that neither of us has done." "I would love that," I replied. And I genuinely meant it. 6 months later, sitting on my Wicker Park balcony with a cup of tea served in the bowl I had made with my own hands, I can clearly see the path we have traveled. Jenna comes to visit me every 2 weeks, always bringing the $150 that she religiously deposits into a savings account that we have agreed will be for Chloe when she turns 18. Not because I asked her to, but because she says it's important for her to maintain that discipline. Chloe still comes on Sundays, but now our time together is different. I no longer feel the desperate pressure to make the most of every minute as if it were the last. Instead, we let the afternoons flow naturally. Sometimes we cook, sometimes we read, sometimes we simply stroll through the neighborhood looking at shop windows. She tells me things about school without me having to interrogate her, and I tell her things about my week without feeling that I have to justify every activity I do without her. Brad is complying with his rehabilitation program, but he is still not part of our lives. Jenna has made it clear that that door will not be reopened until he proves for years, not months, that his recovery is solid. For the first time since I've known her, my daughter is making decisions based on her own values, not on external pressure or fear of abandonment. I have developed a life that surprises me with its fullness. In addition to aqua aerobics and the reading group, I have signed up for English as a second language, ESL classes as a volunteer. It turns out that I have the patience to teach and that I enjoy helping people who are building new lives in a different country. It's a way of helping that feels genuine, not compulsive. The lesson I have learned after all this devastation is paradoxical. I loved my family better when I stopped desperately needing them, when my happiness stopped depending on their approval, when my self-esteem stopped being based on how useful I was to them, when my emotional well-being stopped being hostage to their decisions. Only then could we begin to build relationships based on mutual respect instead of fear of abandonment. Not all stories of family betrayal end with reconciliation. Many end with definitive separations, and that can also be the healthiest decision. But in our case, the complete devastation of what we had allowed us to build something completely new. Have you ever experienced that feeling of loving someone so much that you end up smothering them? Do you know anyone who has confused generosity with emotional manipulation? Tell me in the comments if you have gone through something similar. If this story has touched your heart, like and subscribe to the channel so this message reaches someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to discover what is truly worth keeping.